Thank you for staying with us. We zoom into our big stories, and boy, are they big. This morning, we start by contemplating the economic downturn, the free fall of the city, the flip-flop of our national currency. We're talking about rising inflation standing at what, 31.7% currently. We're talking about our yawning debt to GDP. We're talking about our fiscal deficit. We're talking about the downgrade from the different ratings agencies and more. But it's not so much about them, it's about their impact. A lot of people have been speaking about what this could lead to. One of them, two-time former Chief of Defense Staff, Brigadier General Joseph Nunu-Mensah. Now, he's been sharing some thoughts about how all of this could explode in our faces. Let's listen to what he had to say recently.
We have been saying in Akan that, or rather that hunger, to me, the most painful condition that anybody can have. You have clothes which are worn out, which are torn, but when your children are hungry, you resort to anything to survive. And we can't say that these things happening to the world and us wouldn't have effect on us. They would. Like I said, as if we are not even aware of what is happening to us. Today, if you look at the cost of food in Ghana today, I was in Winnipeg about a week ago. Looking for a common thing like kenke and gari, it was difficult to find. You wouldn't believe. The army have a rest house or a guest house in Winnipeg, beautiful place. They didn't have any food there. Ordinary food, not imported rich food, but gari or beans, whatever. There was nothing there. And that is a very serious situation. The point I'm making is that these situations we are facing are going to have an effect on us. The worst one, if we don't take care, is what happened to Sri Lanka. I was in Sri Lanka some 47 years ago. Briefly, I was actually in India. Lovely country. But they're very much like us. Mostly educated. But they wouldn't go near, manual work. Ghanaians don't want to work. Everybody wants to drive a Land Cruiser. Nobody wants to have a farm and produce food for us to eat. So we should observe what is going on and take serious action. Otherwise, we might, have serious situations on our hand. We are now in August. We're supposed to, in the past, supposed to be the month of plenty. In France, we say zifu, fish everywhere. We know by this time, herrings fall for a peswa, a penny. And maize, new maize, and so on will be appearing. But if you look at the condition today in Ghana, in August, if you don't take care and do something about this situation, come early next year, come January, come February, come March, there will be a serious problem for us, which might lead to riots and even, total breakdown of law and order. That's what I see ahead of us.
Well, that was Brigadier General Joseph Nunu-Mensah sharing his thoughts there. Are you in agreement? Do you think this is the reality, or is this just imagined? Well, joining us for that all-important conversation, we have Professor Kwesi Enning of the Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Training Center, a security expert as well. He joins the conversation. We also have James Agalga, Member of Parliament, joining the conversation. And in the studio, we have Dr. Osai Kwapong as well, joining the conversation. Doc, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
It's been a while. We always do Zoom. Today,
Yes.
It's such a pleasure to have you in the studio.
I'm glad to be here as well.
Right. So let's start this conversation off from those who are joining us virtually. It's all about the reality. What is fact? What is fiction? And maybe what is faction? A mixture of fact and fiction. I'll start with you, Professor Enning, on this all-important bit. You've heard someone who has been in the security space for decades. He's a two-time Chief of Defense Staff, and he paints a gloomy picture. Prof, what is your basic reaction to what Brigadier General Joseph Nunu-Mensah has been saying?
I agree with him 100%.
I didn't quite catch that. Did you just say you agree with him 100%?
Or probably 110%.
I see.
This is because food security is very critical. And I think if I heard him right, several years ago when, I was a child, certainly, August was the month of plenty.
Prof, sorry to interject. I'm struggling a bit to hear you. I do not know whether it's from my end or yours.
Is it much better now?
It is much better. Thank you.
Good. Yeah. Okay. So I said I agree with him 110, percent, because food insecurity is something that causes, social disaffection. It leads to anger. It leads to social instability. But I want to focus on two things. One, the possibility that social crisis can lead to instability, and secondly, the analogy with Sri Lanka. Let me start with the analogy relating to Sri Lanka. Probably most people will think, but why has he gone so far to make such an analogy? And I agree with him once more, probably more than 100% again, because I've just done a major study on Sri Lanka for an international agency. That a study that was completed sometime around March. The conclusions of the study were very clear. One, that the whole government apparatus in Sri Lanka was controlled in a manner in which there were lots of competition and struggles to control particularly intelligence, security information, leading to lack of cooperation, lack of coordination, resulting in the Easter bombing. Now, we have not experienced any such extreme, violence in this country. But if you look at the conversations and the concerns around what has been happening at national security, okay, and there's been a long period of lack of coordination, personal struggles, bureaucratic issues, then the Sri Lanka analogy once more is very, very clear. Leading to that lack of coordination and consensus was that, people started to sense that their security was bad, the economy got weak, coordination on the economic front was very poor, and then the social crisis started. Okay, so that then got compounded with an economy in which fuel was scarce, prices very high. People felt that their ability to get access to little things that made them survive was very difficult, and then everything became a conflagration, and we saw what happened. So General Mensa's cautionary words, in my view, are spot on, an early warning indication that based on his experience and assessment that this is where we are going and that we need to take certain interventionary steps to take us back from the brink. So yes.
So fundamentally you say yes, cautionary, but others would also say they are inflammatory. He cites Sri Lanka, and we know how things have crumbled in that part of the world, and how they're still struggling even as they try to get an IMF program. We too are, seeking an IMF program and all of that. But is the comparative right? You look at Sri Lanka, a place where even access to fertilizers became problematic, access to fuel became problematic, where people could not get the basics that they could consume or wanted to consume, the very basics. I'm not talking luxurious items. So when that comparative is made, or that comparison is made, is it a right one, looking at our situation?
Look, I've used the word cautionary he's cautioning us that we need to take interventionary steps so we don't get there. You know, sometimes you need hyperbole to get people to sit up. And General Nunu Mensah, as I know him, and I know him quite well, we speak very often, is not a man who is used to inflammatory language. I mean, what interest does he have at his age and having experienced everything in inflaming passions to cause trouble? In other jurisdictions, I think it would have been possible for a man of his stature, you know, for somebody to pay him a visit and to say, look, General, you've expressed these concerns. It's highly probable that you may have other information up your sleeves that you cannot share in public. Let's have a cup of tea and then let's discuss it. There's no harm in that at all. You know, so I don't think it is inflammatory. I would call it cautionary and a preventive set of statements, you know, giving guidance and suggestions to prevent us from getting there. Sierra Leone has gotten there. There are other routes elsewhere. So we should listen to him. We should listen to others who are raising their voices also domestically, so that we don't slip down that slippery slope.
Right before I get to James Agalga, very quickly, you made mention of the fact that in Sri Lanka, for example, there was that competition, that struggle to control intelligence. In other words, to not create the real picture, but to stymie the real picture from getting into the public domain. Eventually, that explosion happened in that country. But in recent times, we've seen a shake-up of the national security apparatus. Is that not a step in the right direction? Very quickly on that, Prof.
I'm not sure. I mean, when you speak to people within the intelligence sector, there is some disquiet about the processes and procedures that led to that shake-up. But here, leadership matters, and I think it is up to the new team to be able to demonstrate that leadership qualities of bringing the disquiet under control and harnessing, you know, the intelligence in a manner that continues to protect this country. Let me just give one example of this lack of intelligence, you know, coordination that has exposed this country. One was this, prior to the launch of the See Something, Say Something campaign, and 2 letters that came from the National Security Apparatus Forum, you know, signed by the former National Security Coordinator, that referred to the unfortunate incident with Professor Kofi Awono, you know, which I felt was distasteful, and later on, Mr. Kandapa, the Minister for Security, issuing another letter, you know, cautioning Ghanaians about the possibility of an attack in Ghana, much more sober, reflective, and factual. You cannot have a national security apparatus issuing 2 statements in 2 different ways, all seeking to get the people to be cautious of the fact that there can be the possibility of an attack. And it is that lack of coordination that hopefully this shake-up might seek to bring under control.
Let me bring in James Agalga, Ranking Member, Defense and Interior Committee of Parliament. Thank you, Mr. Agalga, for joining the conversation. Hello, Mr. Agalga. Did we just lose him? Okay, we'll try to get Mr. Agalga on the line once more to get his quick reactions to this as we set the tone for the conversation. But let me come into the studio. Dr. Kwapong is still here with us. Do you agree with Professor Eding on this bit that basically it's a recipe for disaster that we're putting together, and if we don't put the right stops in place, economically speaking, it will spiral into security, you know, a security meltdown, so to speak, as reflected by Brigadier General Nunu Mensah?
So I'm not sure if we would get to the security meltdown part, But definitely the economic signs are worrying. The economic challenges are worrying. And of course, I know there's been reference made to the Sri Lanka case as well as the Sierra Leonean case.
Is it a fair comparison?
And of course, I think on the economics part of it, right, I'm sure they're looking at the economic agitations that led to the outburst and the security implications that came with it, right? So I'm sure when you look at that, then you have to say to yourself, if we are facing similar economic challenges and conditions, then we also then need to be on the alert. But I think if you also look at how Ghanaians have tried to cope in moments of distress or economic challenges, you would see, yes, you've seen protests, organized by Fix the Country. We've seen protests by Occupy Ghana. We've seen protests going all the way back to Mpreko, right? So you do see generally peaceful protest as a way of registering our dissatisfaction and our discontent with whatever economic challenges that the country is facing. So if I look at our historical experiences and the way we have expressed our discontent, that is what makes me say it's not that we should gloss over the economic challenges and the economic reality that citizens face. But I don't think I am at the point where I want to make that stretch to say it would literally result in a security meltdown. Yes, it does have security implications if we don't put in the right measures and all of that. But I don't think we are at the point where, or I don't think we would see that security meltdown, because I have not seen that as a way of Ghanaians expressing discontent.
Is it because maybe in the Fourth Republic we've not acted like maybe other generations where, some of these comments that are espoused by Brigadier General Nunu Mensah have been touted as, coup-mongering in some sense. And in previous, republics that we've had, the three before this current one we're in, some comments like that have stoked civil unrest. Is it because you feel we have come to that cognizance, that level of maturity, so that we will simply not express ourselves to that point of doing what happened recently in Sierra Leone? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes, and in some of my appearances on your show, I have always said that I think we've reached the point where we've made our peace, quote unquote, with democracy. And so, at least in what I see in the Fourth Republic, because we have made our peace with democracy, even in the midst of some of these challenges, it is my sincere belief that that peace with democracy generally guides our actions or inactions in terms of the extent to which we want to, keep that peace with democracy or abandon that peace with democracy. I continue to sincerely believe that even in the midst of these economic challenges, that we would not get to the point where we want to do anything that disturbs that peace we've made with democracy, even as we express ourselves, whether it's through the things we share on social media, whether it's through any protest that we may engage in, that it would still be tempered by ensuring that we do not overall disturb the peace we've made with democracy. But that's my sincere.
That's your opinion. Yes. Let me bring in James Agalga now, Ranking Member, Defense and Interior Committee of Parliament. Now, looking at the security situation in the country, and I'm going to quote General Nunu Mensah here. He says, "We should observe what's going on and take serious action. Otherwise, we might have a serious situation on our hands. Early next year, coming January, February, and March, there will be a serious problem for us, which might lead to riots and even a breakdown in law and order." That is on the back of what he sees from the economic turmoil that we're going through. But for you, is this the right perspective as far as the security space is concerned? Is this factual?
Many people would think that Brigadier General Nunu Mensah is probably engaged in scaremongering. So
some rabble rousing.
He should probably be invited for questioning. I mean, it's very simplistic to take such a position. But if we have our country at heart, I think we should take the comments of the General Nunu Mensah in good faith, because those comments clearly find expression in the national security strategy this government launched recently. I mean, it's there, and in it, strong views have been expressed to the extent that they are telling us that there is a strong symbiotic linkage between ensuring the economic security of our country and the overall national security and stability of the country. These are words you would find, expressed in our national security strategy. Historically, if you even go back into all the political upheavals we have had, any time the military intervened in our politics, starting from 1966, there was generally some form of economic meltdown in our country. I mean, you can reference the 1966 coup, the 79 revolution, the 1981 coup, and you find that General Nunu Mensah's pick is not out of context at all. And so, if you consider what is happening now, right now, you can draw the comparison clearly between what is happening in Ghana and Sri Lanka. And I think he cited the example of Sri Lanka. Look, we're in a country where Ghana clearly is a serious risk. Look at our default position, possible default position. Recently, some statistics analysis came out which shows that Ghana is number 2 after El Salvador.
You're referring to the Bloomberg
one of
chart.
the countries, yes, that stands the risk of going into a default position with respect to payment of interest on our loans and the amortization of the loans themselves. And should this happen, and then we're in big trouble, because we would not be able to import. You would find that our shelves in major stores would become empty. The economy would be in total meltdown. Should that happen, tell me why all the factors for trouble would be present, and the citizenry themselves would not sit down. They would take the law into their hands, and naturally there would be chaos. There would be demonstrations that would spiral out of control. And when that happened, General Nunu Mensah's warning clearly would have seen the day of light. Look, the indicators are very worrying. There is some statistics which also should give us a lot of discomfort. And this is statistics that you can find. And here we are told that 220,000 young Ghanaians, 222,000 young Ghanaians enter the labor market annually. Out of the number, only 20,000 of them get jobs in the formal sector. What it means is the rest have to find jobs in the informal sector. But where there is economic meltdown and jobs are folding up in the informal sector, because people can no longer import, those involved in the import business in this country, and you know very well that in our country, virtually everything is imported. So most of the businesses you see, starting from Abusokai to Makola, they are all importing and selling. Some are into the retail trade. These businesses are collapsing because our currency has virtually collapsed. As we speak, the exchange rate shows that you need 10 cedis to get $1. So many businesses.
Does that mean our economy has collapsed? I mean, you can look at the measure of it. No, hold on, Mr. Agalga. You can look at the measure of it and say that back during your tenure, when it was trading for about 4 cedis, the times have changed, but everything else has changed.
So you are looking
no, hold
at
on. Let me just make the point so
100%.
you react. Let me just make the point so you react to it. The times have changed. We are not in normal times as the picture has been painted to us. We're in the midst of COVID-19. We're in the midst of a Russo-Ukrainian war. We're in the midst of challenges when it comes to oil and access to it across the globe. Does that not have any ripple effect? And I just want you to add, you're saying that it is justified that the likes of Nuno Mensah say that, look, we're sitting on a time bomb. But during your tenure in office, when your administration was in power, you didn't take too kindly to such comments. So why the shifting goalposts? What has changed?
No, nobody is shifting goalposts. With the greatest of respect, let me start with Ukraine-Russia war, and this is the defense that the government has time without number and put out there to justify the economic meltdown in our country and COVID-19. First of all, Ukraine-Russia war is this to account for the economic mess we find ourselves in? I say no. And the other day, we debated this in Parliament. Look, I just told you about our position on the list of countries with the highest default risk. And I told you that Ghana is second to El Salvador. On the same table, you find that Ukraine itself, which is at the receiving end, where the bombs are dropping, is on number 8. Number 8. And so, how is it that the country which is receiving the bomb is on number 8, and Ghana, which hasn't been attacked, is on number 2, and you turn around and tell us that the Ukraine war is responsible for the economic mess we find ourselves in? COVID-19, this country received a lot of money, close to 1.3 billion United States dollars. As we speak, we are unable to account for the COVID funds. And so the other day, a bipartisan committee was constituted in Parliament to look into our COVID expenditures, because all attempts to get the Minister for Finance to be accountable so far as our expenditures in relation to COVID-19 is concerned proved futile. So these two factors cannot be the justification for the economic meltdown that we are currently saddled with. But having said that, let me take you to my next point, which is the Arab Spring, which happens in North Africa and elsewhere.
Right.
You find that some of the happenings in our country clearly, if you like, were some of the things that those countries experienced, and it ended up spiraling into some revolution. People burned themselves up because they just didn't have jobs to do. Yes, some of these factors were present when my party was in the government, but we're saying that things have become worse. At our time, the economic problems we are experiencing now were not as they are now, presently. So if you want to make the comparisons now, you can make the comparisons. But if you do, you find that things were a lot more better at our time. Today, we are at risk of default. At our time, we're never, ever close to defaulting, on our obligations in the financial markets and so on. So it's like you can make all the comparisons. But the point I'm making is that we're in a very dangerous position now. And government knows, they themselves have clearly identified some of these disturbing factors in their national security strategy. That when the economy is in this state, government needs to do something very drastic. Otherwise, clearly, we're going to have security challenges. And it's not General Nuno Mensah who is even saying this. I'm saying that the national security strategy that government itself launched clearly recognizes that when there is some meltdown like we have now, we're in for trouble.
Mr. Agaga, just hold for me. You just reiterated the point you were making, encapsulating it there, that when these signs show up, it means we're headed for trouble. Let me bring in Dr. Ishmael Norman, President of the Institute for Security, Disaster and Emergency, to share your quick thoughts on this dynamic. Now, we're looking at, let me just cite a few comments that have been passed about our economy in recent times. Dr. Theo Champong talks about the fact that government must tone down its response to some of these ratings agencies, S&P, Fitch, Moody's, and all of that. And that, in fact, in recent times, they have been doing so, which is a step in the right direction. He reiterates the fact that the times are really hard in Ghana and that, in fact, in 20 years, these CCC ratings across the board are the worst we have seen. But put that side by side with what Mr. President tells us. I'll turn the economy around. He has been assuring Ghanaians. Recently, when he was speaking on radio, I believe it's North Star Radio, he made two crucial points. He said his ministers had been outstanding. And he also went out to single out Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta, saying that he is an asset to our country. How do you react to these in the context of our economic downturn, and what could be the security implications of same?
For the opportunity. I think we all have to restrain ourselves to make upheaval happen. And so I wouldn't associate myself too strongly with General Nuno Mensah, even though I hugely respect him and his take on security matters. Pandemics, when they happen, they upend everything. And I predicted that everything that we have built will be shattered. This was in 28th of February 2020 at Executive Theatre, your competitor station. I think the world didn't understand the implications, how pervasive it will be within the economy, how intrusive it will be. So now that we are confronted with the reality of the post-pandemic, or maybe the lowering of the incidence and the prevalence of the disease of COVID-19, we are beginning to understand that most countries were not prepared. The economic downturn can be blamed partly on that and partly on inefficiencies of the government. And I agree with you that the government should tone down its defensive posture because it doesn't help the situation. If the government appeals to us that we didn't understand the implications of the pandemic on the economy.
If I may briefly, we have seen different countries weather the storm of COVID-19 and the Russo-Ukrainian war. In the United States, where you would, for example, because sometimes we cite them, where you would say that, well, they're also experiencing inflation. It has moved from 2% to about 8%. But at the same time, they are employing record numbers. Their unemployment rate is one of the lowest we have seen in a long while. That cannot be said of Ghana. So the dynamics are pretty different for different countries, different strokes for different folks. How then can we say, because even the World Bank has said that we did not get certain things right, even before COVID, and now we're paying the price. So is it not a right call then?
Well, I don't think we like to see mayhem. I don't think we like to see coup in this country.
I don't think that is what the general is suggesting.
No, I'm saying that some people actually want to see that. And it will be unwise for us to go in that direction because it will basically send Ghana maybe 50 years. So we don't want that. What we want is that we have to put our heads together and rebuild this economy. Unfortunately, our government doesn't appear to listen to good advice. For somebody like Kojo Impiani to say that, Honorable Kojo Impiani, to say that government should listen, Professor Adai mentioned to say that government should listen to business, to the manufacturing class, the banks, the SMEs. If government is not listening to us, then this government has a huge arrogance problem, which I don't think It's not because they don't want to listen, but I think they are overwhelmed with the quantum of advice that is coming from all corners almost every single day. So let us humble ourselves, all of us, give government a little bit of leeway and see how the whole thing is going to pan out. Because government says, the president said, we can bring back the economy, but we cannot bring back one single dead person. I believe there's some reality to it. And recently, Kwabena Japan said, even though government says we are broke, they are still doing projects, they are still finding money to do A, B, C, D. So all of these things are germane to the conversation, and you have to look at it holistically. So for me, when I look at it holistically, I do not think that Nana Akufo-Addo will sit idle and let this country collapse. I do not think so.
Let me quickly ask you, especially as you bring in Kwabena Japan, former General Secretary of the NPP. He's been saying a lot recently, and maybe contrary to what you're suggesting. He also says, for example, let me quote him here, in a recent interaction with Kesben TV. He says, inflation is over 32%, so we're in dangerous territory. So the only major thing the president can do is to arrest the situation and clear out the managers of the economy. He has spoken on this platform, Joy News, and spoken about the fact that he feels the finance minister, Ken Ofori-Atta, should resign. That has been re-echoed by Kwejon Pienim, among others, so many industry watchers. Is that a stance you agree with, especially when the president says the finance minister is a national asset and that no reshuffle will happen?
I actually respect Honorable Kwabena Japan, and what he has said is a fact. He's not making it up, and that inflation has gone up that high. However, this thing didn't happen overnight, and so we cannot solve the problem overnight. So let's give the presidency some time. Also, you have to remember that the finance minister is his relative. It's very difficult to get nasty. That's why the law doesn't allow related persons to work in, one office or whatever, because it's very difficult to reprimand them, to punish them, and even to sack them. And the president is faced with this huge, dynamics. If you sack your own cousin or when you go home, what happens? What is the family's reaction going to be? Don't forget that we didn't start off with an economy that was high performing. This was a badly functioning economy. It's been like that for a very long time, manufacturing hovering between 4% and 10%. So when you are confronted with issues like that, everything falls apart, and you have to rebuild everything from the ground up. And that is what I think they are trying to do. And that's part of the reasons why the president doesn't want to reshuffle, because he knows the people were there when the problem started, and they probably understand it better than a new crop of people. So if I change them, then I'm going to have to, educate those guys. But these were part of the cause of the problem, and they should find the solutions. I think it's a wise decision. Sometimes because of our feelings for quick resolutions of issues, we don't have the patience to let things happen.
Quickly on that, right before I let go of you. So there's a saying that if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. That appears to be the situation with Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta. And are you suggesting that there's any paucity, lack of brains, the men, so to speak, in the MPP to man the economy? The likes of Dr. Marcus Ibe-Yeboah, himself a former member of the Finance Committee of Parliament, have taken on the finance minister and some of the things he has said and the actions he has, put across as far as being in that office. So I do not get that tangent. First of all, it smacks of nepotism, family and friends. And so because of that, it is difficult to set these people aside. But like Kwabena Japan says, you can't let the same people who have driven us to this stage to remain in office. Do you disagree? Very quickly on that.
I don't disagree, but we all want a paradigm shift. But it should shift into the hands of who? we really don't have the men per the selection that the president has made in the past.
We
But
don't have the men
if the
per the president's
it should
selection.
shift to whom?
I just
That's
wanted
what
to
we-
reiterate. So you're
Huh?
saying we don't have the men per the president's selections.
Exactly, because the result shows that he didn't have the men to begin with. So if we want to shift the paradigm, how many of new economists are within the immediate circle of family and friends that the paradigm can shift into? Because he says his basic criteria for selection is loyalty and previous association. How many of us have previous association with the president?
That's a very telling, if not damning, statement you make. But I just want you to go a little further. So you're suggesting that for President Akufo-Addo, it is more about the people around him. He is comfortable with the people around him, people he knows, people he is directly related to, and so that is part of the problem in terms of removing Ken Ofori-Atta and maybe other people who are in his inner circle, whether related to him by blood or close to him over the ages. Is that what you're saying?
It has always been part of the problem. However, COVID has actually blown it in a big way, amplified it in a big way. And so we are all questioning, why can't the president step out of the box and select people he's not familiar with, who are not related to him? Because this president chooses people that are actually related to him, and he does it openly without apology. So he needs somebody like Honorable Ken Ofori-Atta with that kind of experience. Unfortunately, Honorable Ken is not the flavor. He's not the flavor of the month or the year. And is there another person close to the circles of the presidency that can fill in that space? Probably the answer is no.
Just to clarify, did you say he's not clever for the job? I didn't quite get that.
No, I say he's not flavor of the month or probably the year.
Right.
Oh, he's very clever. I would never look down upon the skills of
Ken
Ofori-Atta. I can never do that, ever. He's very smart.
Right.
Just that things are not working for him no matter what he does. And sometimes it happens. And because of COVID, because of the Ukraine war, and the high rise of cost of petrol and all of that, it's making things very difficult.
Right.
This all goes to the point that our economy was not a well-functioning economy, period.
Period. Thank you. We'll hang it there, Dr. Norman. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
You're most welcome.
All right. We introduced Dr. Ishmael Norman to share these thoughts. We'll come to the other guests who are already with us. Dr. Akakpo, a lot has been said since your initial bite, and especially with Dr. Norman talking about the fact that, look, the president's, basically what he's saying is the president's hands are tied. Because guess what? It's a family and friends situation. He likes to have family and friends around him. And in this instance, he doesn't see that the president, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, will have the guts, the temerity to sack Ken Ofori-Atta. Because guess what? They are related. And full stop. That is it. How do you react to that?
I mean, that's a serious indictment. If I accept the argument he's making.
Do you not accept it?
Well, so far he has thrown his support behind him. Of course, the basis for his support, I don't think he alluded to the fact that he's family. That's why he's keeping him. Publicly, his argument is that the ministers are performing. He's an asset.
Outstanding.
They are outstanding. He's an asset. And therefore, based on his own evaluation, he doesn't think that he needs to move anybody around or he needs to remove his finance minister. But I would also think that given all the current challenges that we are facing, that perhaps he could respectfully rethink that position. So nobody is indicting the honorable finance minister for, as Dr. Ishmael said, I'm not saying he's not a clever man, he's not a smart man, right? But I think sometimes in governing, it's both a science and an art. The science part is, the actual policies, procedures, decisions that you make in terms of the everyday governing. But the art part of governing is how you deal with public perceptions, how you factor in public input, and how you also deal with the politics of governing. I have said, in conversations with friends that sometimes a reshuffle does the art part of governing, which is you shake up the team. You never even know some of the dividends that you can buy in terms of goodwill from the public. When they see actions like that, move. And the reshuffle doesn't even mean fire people completely. Sometimes it may even mean that
Move them around.
And
some would tell you that once they get too comfortable, it becomes problematic.
Right. And sometimes maybe it's just because you need a fresh perspective. Maybe if you step outside of your immediate domain, perhaps there are things that you are not seeing that another person coming in from the outside or things like that. But whatever it is, for me, I have said, and I said on a Joy News program, that my point of disagreement with the president, respectfully, is that if truly his ministers have been outstanding, the only question that I have is, why are perceptions changing for the worse, the extent to which it is, right? So if you look at Afrobarometer in 2017, by 2019, the president had seen some slight dips, but it wasn't as significant as we're seeing now in 2022.
Right.
Even if you look at the pre-election polls in 2020, the views and the perceptions, almost 7 out of 10 thought that the president was managing the economy well.
Right.
He scored high on managing COVID and all of those things, right? So you ask yourself, in the last 2 years, what has happened that even in an area like education, right, with the signature
free SHS
policy,
and all that,
only 3 out of 10 Ghanaians are saying the government is addressing the educational needs of Ghanaians very well. So for me, those are some
to
of
the point where his credibility rating among the people has dipped to the worst in the Fourth Republic. That is telling.
Yes, so I look at all of those things, and those are the signals that I look at and say, how do you actually get, His Excellency to rethink his position on this issue of, even if it's not a reshuffle, but at least to recognize that there is a serious change in perception of how he and his government is performing, and what does that mean for decisions like the key players in his administration, and whether he needs, that reshuffling, some new faces, new energy, fresh perspective on some of the key challenges that we are facing. If all of those indicators looked right, then I would agree that, I don't have to worry about a reshuffle. But all of the indicators are pointing to the fact that things are not going well, unless again he trusts the same people to be able to help him turn things around. But he's the only one who can truly explain. Anyway, like he said, he's the appointing authority. He thinks about it, but he believes that they are doing an outstanding job. But the indicators say otherwise. So I don't know. Unless maybe, again, this is the team that would help turn things around.
Do you believe this team, from what you've seen, very briefly, do you believe this team can turn things around?
No, I think some new faces would do.
Okay.
Some new people in key portfolio areas would help.
Like which ones? Finance Ministry?
Yes.
Finance Ministry?
Yes. I think some fresh eyes and perspective in there will be helpful, particularly as we go into the IMF bailout program.
Let me rope in Professor Enning right before I come back to you and we change the tenor of the conversation. Okay, so we'll get Professor Enning back, but let me put this question to James Agalga, and it's a question that I want you to be brutally honest on, because we faced it during your administration, during this administration, and I'll come back to Doc on that as well. It has to do with this bit about family and friends in government, as espoused by Dr. Ishmael Norman. And, how exactly do we deal with this situation beyond expecting the leader to be morally upright or to do the right thing? Because time in, time out, time and again, We've said that, oh, it's family and friends. Mahama was accused of it. Akufo-Addo is being accused of it. But what do we do? Is it from the policy angle? Should we bar, so to speak? Is it practical to do so? Leaders from appointing family members, should we leave it open? What are the stop gaps that we should put in place to stem the tide of saying? What is your take on that?
But we need to be very candid with ourselves. When Mahama was accused of running a family and friend government, the question we asked at the time was whether there was any basis or foundation for anybody to make such a statement. Look, at the time when Mahama was accused of running a family and friend government, those of us who were in his administration and were of northern extraction were all lumped together and treated as family of President Mahama. So I remember, I was listed as part of the family of President Mahama, even though my ethnicity is Bulsa. President Mahama's ethnicity is Gonja. But we were lumped together, all of us, and treated as family and friends. If my memory serves me right, the only family member who served in President Mahama's government at the time was Madame Joyce Bawa.
Yes, Bawa Mokhtari.
Who was Deputy Minister for Transport at the time. She was the only one who had black ties with the president. And she was even just a Deputy Minister for Transport. And yet were falsely accused of running a family and friends government. So
Mr. Agalga, I get the point you're making, but for the sake of time, whether it was one person, and I agree with you, the point has been made that it was just Joyce Bawa Mokhtari, but whether it was one person or 10 person in a different administration.
For a family and friends government.
Right, I get it, but how do we deal with it?
If you draw the analogy, Evans, today, you can count them, starting from the Amwakwata, finance minister, name them. They are there. The secretary to the president, name them. They are all family members. The list is so tall. You see, so that in itself does not inspire confidence. When you have a country where unemployment is skyrocketing, people have completed university, they are very capable and can find jobs to do, and you have a government that has a tall list of family members. Naturally, people would be worried.
Okay.
But, Evans.
So to wrap the conversation, this end of the conversation on the security perspective, yes, it's tied, it's interwoven with the economic perspective as well. That is why we're putting the two together. For you, what do you want to see, James Agalga, and then we shall wrap with you. What do you want to see from the security perspective? What do you want to see from the economics perspective to forestall any such situation like what we've seen recently, the charge in Sierra Leone, where some people spilled over onto the streets, and Sri Lanka?
Confidence, it is important that the president bites the bullet. Yes, I know the finance minister is his relative, but I think the time has come for the finance minister to bow out graciously or be fired. Why? This is the minister who told us not too long ago that IMF was not an option. But today he's ended up taking us to the IMF.
Okay.
How possible is it that that same person can look into the eyes of the officials of the IMF and negotiate a package for this country that will take us out of the book? So Ken Ofori-Atta must leave the scene and allow a new face to lead the negotiation at the IMF. So that is one of the things the government must do. Secondly,
and maybe to wrap,
government reaction and commentary on current happenings must be circumspect.
Okay.
People are suffering. People are dying as a result of the economic meltdown in our country. But if you listen to the way government officials continue to speak to the issues, the government's wasteful expenditure, look at the presidency, the number of staffers we have at the presidency. So they could start by pruning down on the number even the number of ministries we have, and we have spoken at length about some of these things. When they do that, they'll be able to inspire confidence in the Ghanaians.
Okay.
By getting us to accept the fact that we're in a difficult situation, and for which reason we'd all have to tighten our belts whilst we fashion out solutions to the challenges that have bedeviled us over the period. If we don't do that, Evan, trust me, we're in for trouble.
Thank you, Honorable Agalga, for joining the conversation. This is Benjamin Akakpo, though. We do hear from time to time that my voice sounds very much like Evans Mensah's voice. But thank you for joining the conversation. James Agalga is a member of Parliament and, of course, member of the Defense and Interior Committee of Parliament. We also have Professor Kwesi Enning still with us joining the conversation. Prof, thank you so much for staying with us. Having heard everything that has been said from the economic perspective, the security perspective, and what Dr. Ishmael Norman throws in there, family and friends and the impact, what for you is the way forward to prevent a security meltdown?
Then history matters. We are all good history teachers, but very bad history students. Family and friends can be cited historically to have brought several governments down. In Liberia, the Talbot regime was brought down because over close to 70 decades, it ran the True Whig Party, ran a family and friends government in which telling the president the truth, taking the hard decisions, getting people to quit because they couldn't deliver, or people resigning as a mark of honor, were basically things that did not happen. We need to bring meritocracy back into public service and allow institutional mechanisms and procedures and oversight processes. Otherwise, spin and deep fake information will be churned out in which those who manage public affairs deliberately tell or put statements out there that are incorrect. When that happens, over time, the governed will lose trust in those who govern them. And when that umbilical cord of trust that binds governance together breaks, then we'll see social conflagration of the type that General Nunu Mensah has cautioned us about. We haven't reached the tipping point yet, and therefore we can pull back from the brink.
We've not reached...
Institutional mechanisms working, meritocracy getting back, and ensuring that mechanisms and processes are allowed to work.
Prof, I know you're taking leave of us, but just let me sneak in this as you speak of meritocracy. 2 quick points, just very briefly. The Ghana Police Service, we've heard from the IGP recently talking about this bit that has stoked, conversation around meritocracy, that if you lose a family member in active service, they would give some option to other family members to get into the police service, and also a response time of 10 minutes. Your quick thoughts on that, how feasible they will be?
Well, the response time of 10 minutes, I think he's introducing motorcycles. So that is feasible, particularly in places where the roads are decent. But if you take where I normally drive to get into town, I think the 10 minutes will be tough. But I think that sending that signal and knowing that we can see police motorcycles all over the place responding quickly, even if it's 15 minutes, 12 minutes, where we can point out who the criminals are and they can be chased. That brings confidence. I think when he made the statement about encouraging police performance and effectiveness, and that in the course of duty, if you die, I think he used the word competent or qualified person.
Qualified.
Yes. So it is not just, what is the word I'm looking for? It's not just a free for all. That, Uncle Kweku has died in the course of service through Kojo Minta just leave your farm and then come.
But the likes of Professor Kweku Asare feel once you are making any preferences, it is wrong. It is not the right way to go.
Oh, no. But I think it's an idea he has put into the public space. And as we critique it, as we make suggestions, I think it will be fine.
All right.
So I don't, it is not the preferred way to go, but I think he's put it out there. Let's look at it. Let's discuss it. Let's give him some new ideas. Because all that we are looking for is an effective law enforcement, service that delivers, the public protection and the private protection that we are looking for.
Professor Henning, thank you so much. We are immensely grateful for your time this morning. Professor Kwesi Henning of the Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Training Center. Before I take your wrap-up comments, Dr. Kwapong, I want you to listen to the second portion of what Brigadier General Nunu Mensah says. Let's just listen to this.
When we are growing up, this that you see is amazing. And with my senior colleague, 89-year-old man, we wanted to see the president. We saw this coming. We met at the Air Force Officers' Mess and planned to see him. I saw Kwame him. You can ask him, Kwame, I want to see the president. He called a certain number, Ochedaku. We were in New York, General Assembly. See the president. I wouldn't talk to the president on your medium. I want to talk to him to his ears. President Mills was a loving president. He could be General Brat. Now, what's the Kuraba? He could be our young advisor, when you feature so of quality, what should I do? That's what he told me. Mr. President, that's where the Ufiasem came from. Maybe they wouldn't call people like me. It was my old friend. I campaigned with 98 when he was seeking political leadership of the MPP. But if today, when we are in a crisis, come on, call those that can help. Sit down, Jenna, sit down. What should you do? The country is sinking. We are on board the boat. The boat that sank in Tama. We are sinking. I dream about that. If the president won't call me, I wouldn't talk to the president on your medium. I would talk to him to his ears at the Flagstaff House.
They come to you, but when they get the reins of government, they don't even want to listen to you. He has accused former President Mahama of that, and he has also accused the current president, Akufo-Addo, of that.
I think that sometimes once you are in office, the people you develop an inner circle of people you really trust, and so there's a political culture where people outside of your innermost circle, sometimes you are not sure, even if their intentions are pure, things that they want to share with you are driven by purely, concerns about the country, etc., etc. I suspect there's just something about occupying, the high office of the land where you tend to be a lot more trusting, though, of an inner circle, a core group of people. Therefore, sometimes making it a little difficult to listen to those, or even to give audience to those outside of your circle. Maybe intermediaries can broach some of those things, or you can, find a way to sieve through the advice that comes through from external, entities, even people who may previously have been, your colleagues or your friends. So it's a challenging thing. I don't know what it is about. These are just my speculations about probably what the holding of office does and who you end up truly trusting. So I think there's an element of that. People could be very well intentioned, but I think holding power makes you, changes the trust dynamics, for you and who you want to bring closer.
And as far as you are concerned, just to rehash what you said, basically these are turbulent economic times, but they will not result in a security meltdown.
No.
Okay. Well, let's move the conversation a notch further as we take a look at what it would take to reform or transform our economy. There have been some suggestions that have come to the fore, and foremost among them, that put forward by Dr. Steve Manteal, formerly of the Public Interest and Accountability Committee. Now, he's had a lot to say. He's put that on social media, and you can see it on your screens currently. We have him joining the conversation. Right before I get to it, let me just welcome him aboard. Dr. Steve Manteal, a very good morning to you. Thank you for joining the conversation.
My pleasure to join your discussion.
Great. So we're going to walk through that 17-point list, and then we're going to cut into each one of them as much as possible to find out how practical they are and how germane they are to resolving our economic situation. So you put out just a few days ago, still, and this is a reiteration of a point you've made, my 17-point homegrown strategy for getting Ghana out of its current difficulties. 1, cuts the size of government to 50, not more. 2, abolish all deputy director positions created in the SOEs and parastatals after 2017. 3, reduce the number of presidential staffers. 4, make free SHS progressively free. Parents must pay for feeding if they opt for boarding. 5, convert teacher trainee and nurse trainee allowances to students' loans. 6, restore road tolls, but this time collect upfront, incorporating it into roadworthy collections. 7, abolish the e-levy to grow Momo business and tax the telcos for the resulting growth in income. 8, prioritize the APFA expenditure to focus more on job creation and access to clean, affordable energy. 9, stop further disbursements to the National Cathedral. 10, abandon the Ejapa nonsense, as you put it. 11, implement the tax exemption law. 12, undertake lifestyle audits for tax purposes. 13, show greater commitment to fighting corruption. 14, remove ministerial discretion on capping of the stabilization levy to grow the fund. 15, restore distribution service charges at charge 2 in the electricity tariff formula. 16, implement measures to stem illicit financial flows. And 17, very interesting, abolish ex gratia. You are co-chair of the Ghana Extractive Industries Transparency Unit. How did you even come by this entire list that you've put forth, 17 points? What made you put together this list?
Right, thank you very much, Benjamin. I've had the opportunity of working in various sectors of the national economy through my work with ISODEC. Of course, I guess we know that the acronym ISODEC stands for Integrated Social Development. And so we approach development from a multifaceted perspective. And so that exposure gave me some good understanding of national economic management. Let me make the point that in economic management, there are 2 fundamental factors to consider. One is revenue, how you raise revenue to finance development. And raising revenue to finance development is not just about loans, it's not just about borrowing, because as you borrow, you should understand that there is a cost to the borrowing, and that can erode if you don't apply the borrowed monies properly, that can erode any intended benefits. And so one of the things that I believe we can do in terms of revenue generation, this actually stems from my own experience in working, for instance, in the mining sector, but also working on economic policy issues. First and foremost, look at the gold sector. We take our raw material gold and ship them outside the country. Now, the returns on that kind of shipment is not actually anything to write home about. Now, our minerals and mining, the regulations actually provide that we can take our mineral royalty either in cash or in kind, and I mean raw material gold. So, but then over the years, we have opted to take our mineral royalty in cash. Now, if we're minded to actually optimize our benefits from mining, then what we would do probably would be to take our royalty in kind, that is in gold. And then we feed this gold into jewelry manufacturing. So we'll be exporting as a country jewelry and not gold bars. Now, what you do then, the benefit of doing that is that you will be creating jobs for your people as you actually set up these jewelry manufacturing facilities. So you'll be creating jobs. The companies that are making the jewelry will be paying corporate income tax to the state. The workers who work in these factories will be paying personal income tax again to the state. Now, your gold export will not be gold bars, it will be manufactured product, and therefore they will give you higher returns in terms of the export values. And so when you do that, then you are actually mobilizing resources domestically to finance your development. But all we've done, for as long as I can remember, is to ship raw material gold. That doesn't give us much and doesn't actually create opportunities for job creation in our economy. So one of the things that I would prefer in this regard would be to look at all the primary commodities that we export and see whether we couldn't add value. And in that process, create and again, you can say same for the oil sector. There was a reason why we're exporting our crude oil. The idea was to expose it to the international market. 10 years on, we have exposed our Jubilee crude enough to the market that it's gained some recognition. Perhaps time has come for us to look at the possibility of adding value, maybe refining our oil prior to export. Of course, I do recognize the fact that to be able to do this meaningfully, currently it's about to do between 40 to 60%.
Doc, we're struggling a bit with the connection. Maybe you can just go back to the percentages that you were just mentioning. And there's been talk about getting at least 25% from the resources that we actually, exploit, the gold, the oil, and all of that. Can you quickly rehash that point?
What's making is that with gold, for instance, our law allows us to take mineral royalty in kind. And that affords us the opportunity to add value to our gold exports. So then when you take your gold in kind, you feed it into local jewelry manufacturing. So you'll be exporting gold, jewelry and not gold bars. Now that gives you higher value in terms of one, job creation. So the companies will be paying corporate income tax. The workers in these factories will be paying personal income tax. Now your gold export then appreciates also in value because you are actually exporting manufactured products. And so you are able to generate more revenue to finance local development. And same applies to oil. At the beginning of oil discovery, when we started production, we were exporting our crude. It made sense at the time because we needed to expose our brand of crude to the international market. We've done that for 10 years. For us, time is due for us to look at adding value to our crude oil. Now, the benefit you get from actually processing your own crude oil is that you benefit from the other derivatives. For instance, we're talking about petrol, diesel, to some extent, LPG. And then when all is said and done, you also have what you call the bitumen, which can be used for road construction. So when you ship your raw crude outside the economy, you are invariably depriving yourself of these benefits that come with processing your own crude. And therefore, there's a need for us to begin to think of our primary commodities and look at the value chain opportunities for enhancing value retention within the national economy. And so I say this in respect of raising revenue to finance development. It is not just about borrowing. It's about looking at within your own context what you can do to generate more revenue than you're doing currently.
Before I come into the studio, I'd like you to walk us through some of the key points you make. I'll just take them, I'll lump some of them together. For example, points 1 and 3 can be put together. Cut the size of government to 50, not more, and then reduce presidential staffers. How practical is this, looking at the fact that we have over 100 ministers at post? We have, deputies at the SOEs and all of that. And then we have the, wide case of presidential staffers, which we've added on to now. The explanation would be given that some have moved from different sectors and now fallen under the presidency. How do we go about it?
Right. I recall when the president appointed his ministers, and there was a hue and cry over the numbers. But the president told us that, look, he knows what he wants to do and what he wants to achieve. And so we should wait, and that the results or the output would justify the huge numbers. Now, we come a full circle, and we know that the numbers have not justified what themselves, actually, because in spite of the large numbers, we have ended up in a situation where we are needing IMF support. Now, I believe that in economic management, you need to pay a lot of attention. I mentioned earlier the revenue side, but you also need to pay a lot of attention to the expenditure side. So if your revenue cannot take care of your expenditures, the rational thing to do is to reduce your expenditures. And in doing this, I take cognizance of the fact that since this government assumed office, they've piled up unnecessarily the expenditure side of things. So, for instance, apart from the huge ministerial appointments, you have the creation of additional director positions in almost all the state-owned enterprises and parastatals. Go to ECG, go to Ghana Water, go to Petroleum Commission, Minerals Commission. For all of them, this government has created multiple deputy director positions, some of them 2, some of them 3. It's unnecessary. And therefore, it actually burdens the national budget. And I think we need to do something urgently about it. I need to also say that there are other social interventions that have also compounded our expenditures. Take NAPO, for instance. What is the real added value of NAPO, apart from maybe getting people just from home and creating a certain sense of employment for them? And you find that most of the NAPO, NAPO team are actually working in non-productive sectors. So you have some of them standing in the streets and directing traffic. They are useful, they are good, but then they do not add to national production. So if you are, for instance, deploying NAPO, trainees or NAPO staff to go into real production, let's say in the agri sector and other manufacturing sectors of the economy, then they will actually be generating an output that can cater for the allowance in the district assemblies. And in fact, they are doing nothing. But some of them even stay at home and only collect the allowances. I don't think that this is prudent use of the resources that we are struggling to generate within the economy.
I have 5 more points 4, 6, 9, 12, 17, but I'll lump them together so we can take a quick stab at them. Of course, you also talk about fighting corruption in point 13, and we all know the tangent or trajectory of that, especially on the back of the latest reports we've seen from the Afrobarometer, the one put together by Shraj and the Ghana Statistical Service and the UNODC, among others. But let's look at quickly free SHS and the road tolls. In point 4, you suggest that free SHS should be reviewed and that parents should pay for feeding if they opt for boarding. We know about the challenges with the buffer stock and how it's been very difficult to fund that drive. Then you also talk about road tolls being restored, but being collected upfront, incorporating it into roadworthy collections. That doesn't seem to follow the trajectory that the roads minister, Honorable Siama, has been towing in recent times. Why these suggestions? How do we implement them, so to speak? Hello, Dr. Mantel. Okay, I think the connection...
Foremost, my views on the free SHS.
Okay, go ahead.
Good. My views on the free SHS is informed by empirical studies I did on countries that actually preceded Ghana in the implementation of this initiative. Okay. Uganda, Kenya, South Africa. Now, the point is that in introducing a new policy, it is important to look at those who have done it before and look at the challenges they encountered and put in place measures to avoid these challenges. If you look at Uganda, for instance, their approach was to, provide for capitation grants for all students. So you are given a certain amount of money and you, the student, actually decide whether you want to, for instance, go to the private school or go to the public school. And indeed, in Uganda, they included the private sector schools in the pre-SHS implementation. The money was to take care of fees and stationery, and that whatever the money could not cover, parents only top up. And that was what they did. But even that, given that the Uganda did not have much of natural resources to boast of, they depended largely on donor financing. So the development grants that were given by their bilaterals and the multilateral development agencies actually complement whatever shortfall there was in the implementation of the initiative. Now, there were times when, because of the over-dependence on donor funding for the project, and the delay, sometimes these monies did not come through at all. It led to a certain poor implementation of the issue. There were times when school reopened and students would be at home because the donor component of the funding had not come through. And so when we decided as a country to actually make the oil sector contribute substantially to the implementation of the free SHS, I became worried. I became worried because of the volatility nature of oil revenues on our budget. And so I thought that we needed to broaden the strength. At the time when we started free SHS implementation, Cocoa Board alone was actually catering for about 13,000 Ghanaian students in secondary school, which was a form of free SHS for those beneficiaries. I thought that if we had been mindful to think through sustainability of the initiative, we would have created a pool of funds, which will include whatever Cocoa Board was using to finance these 13,000 students. Again, most of our corporate bodies, for instance, Unilever, Cosmos Energy, Tallow Energy, name them, Goldfields, Newmont, they all had scholarship programs for their benefit, their host communities. So we could have spoken to them and harness all this into that common pool. When you do that, then you don't actually put all the burden on oil and taxes. You broaden. So the contribution of each revenue stream will be minimal, such that when it fails to come through, it wouldn't impact substantially on the implementation of the program. It's not too late. We can go back to the drawing board and take another look at the financing of free SHS. Now, the other issue you raised has to do with the road tolls.
And we'll have to make this a bit bite-sized owing to time, so we can have the reactions from them. So maybe just briefly on that point as well. Then we'll take the last batch.
In respect of road tolls, I think it was a great mistake on the part of government to have repealed them when we didn't have readily available revenue to replace them. So, for instance, I've heard the Ministry of Finance complain that because of the delay in passing the e-levy, that is actually the reason we have ended up in this mess. But there was no reason, because e-levy was not passed. It would have made sense to wait till e-levy was passed, and then you can repeal the road toll levy. But somehow we rushed, and therefore we lost revenue. See how long we've abolished these road tolls for, and see how much revenue we would have lost. If for nothing at all, it would have actually patched potholes on some of the major highways of our country. So I believe that going forward, it's about revenue. And we need to, government has explained that there was another reason, which was the huge traffic pileup at the toll booths. Yeah, we can deal with that situation by incorporating the road tolls going forward into our roadway. One, the good thing about that is that it gets everybody else to pay. Currently, the road toll, the way it was structured, was discriminatory. The rich and affluent who lived in cantonments and other rich areas that do not have to go through the toll booths were not paying road tolls. And yes, they were benefiting from the work that road tolls was doing for this country. And those poor people who live in the peripheries, and beyond, who have to, on daily basis, drive through toll booths, were paying and the rich were enjoying. I don't think it was fair. And so going forward, I think that everybody who owns a car in this country ought to pay for road tolls, and it ought to be incorporated into our roadway so government can have quick access to this money to do what it needs to do.
Two final points from the 17-point list. You know that it's pretty lengthy, and it would take quite a bit of time to exhaust all of them. But two crucial points. One, you say stop further disbursements to the National Cathedral, the $547 million National Cathedral. And point 17, the final point, abolish ex gratia. And that is an interesting point you make, because guess what? Kenya, for example, just had its presidential and other elections, gubernatorial elections, among others. And Uhuru Kenyatta, when he leaves office, is going to get many millions of Kenyan shillings by way of ex gratia. In fact, they have bigger packages in Kenya. Some have argued that that makes ours a drop in the bucket and we shouldn't be crying so much about it. A quick reflection on these two matters, and then I'll have Dr. Akakpo come in with his own assessment of them.
Well, you find that these generous packages given to our political elite in our part of the world were for a purpose.
Right.
We're coming through an era of coups, and people will come to power and want to refuse to go. So the idea really was to cushion them. And the fear usually was about what would I do and how do I sustain my quality of life beyond my current political role. And therefore, the idea was really to cushion them so that when they come into office, they will leave when the time is due. That is at the very top level. And that actually trickled down to those we call the Article 71 and what you call it, holders. These are all a function of our 1992 Constitution. And I've heard, calls for its review. A lot of the premise upon which that Constitution was founded have outlived their usefulness. So a time has come to look at our means, our ability to sustain these huge expenditures. I don't think that this economy can sustain these expenditures going into the future, especially when we are struggling to grow it.
Okay. I suppose that also includes the National Cathedral bit. Dr. Mantea.
Yeah, of course, the National Cathedral, I don't think, and I agree with those who maintain that position, that it is not a national priority. Let us first focus on dealing with our economic challenges. When we are done with dealing with the economic challenges and we grow the economy, we'll be able to do the National Cathedral at ease and with little adverse impact on the rest of us.
Should it come from the state's kitty?
It should not.
Okay.
I think that, and in fact, by the nature of its incorporation, we know it's a non-governmental organization. And therefore, I cannot see how you use governmental resources to finance non-governmental projects.
Dr. Mantea, we're grateful that you've taken the time to share some thoughts on these matters. I'll just have you stay with us briefly, because as I bring in Dr. Akakpo, maybe he might say something you might briefly want to react to. So if you don't mind, just stay with us. Dr. Akakpo, quite an exhaustive, maybe not an exhaustive list, but quite a number of things mentioned here. What is your reaction? I've spoken to him, for example, about trimming down the size of government, free SHS, and what his suggestions are about the road tolls, and now about ex gratia and the National Cathedral. But with all of these points, what are the ones that leap at you that you feel maybe we could actually start rolling out in the shortest possible time?
The size of government issue, because it has, and as he rightly pointed out, it has cost implications. So I know that whenever the conversation about the size of government comes up, besides the cost, there's also the efficiency and the capacity issue. Well, how many hands do I really need to be able to deal with all of the issues and challenges that the country faces, et cetera, et cetera. But I agree with him that we really need to do something about the size of government. I think that, if we really wanted to, I think that would be something that can be, quickly, addressed. Because of the cost implications that it has. If you look at our budget, if you look at on the expenditure side and how much we spend on, for example, wages and salaries, so
compensations,
it's a huge chunk of the budget. So there's really some virtue in looking at the size of government and seeing where you can truly cut back to save some cost on that. I like the idea of the tax exemptions as well. And I think, if I'm correct, Parliament eventually has passed that tax exemptions bill.
The bill, right.
The bill, I think, right. So if you could regularize it, because that also has revenue implications, for the state, in terms of, where do you cap it, where don't you cap it, how much are you losing, how much do you make sure that you don't continue losing, but at the same time, what sort of tax exemption regime can you put in place to also ensure that you're attracting both domestic as well as foreign investments in key sectors of your economy. Progressive free SHS. Yes, so the ability to pay is critical because, again, of the cost implications of a program like that. The only thing I say is that in order to be able to really do that test of ability to pay as a function of enjoying some of these social intervention programs, it would mean that two things must happen. We must all truthfully report our income that is used to determine our ability to pay, but also government has to be in a position to be able to verify the truthfulness of what we respond, right? So if it says, okay, you opted for boarding, but your income is only 1 cedi, therefore you qualify, versus, well, your income is 100 cedis, therefore you don't qualify. But how do we make sure that if I'm earning 1, I'm truthfully reporting 1, or if I'm earning higher, I'm not reporting something lower just because I want to enjoy that social intervention benefit. So again, ex gratia, that's a really tricky one. My older brother would say, turkeys don't vote for Christmas. So the very people that you are asking to
are the very beneficiaries.
Are the very beneficiaries of it. So that would be a little more challenging. I think it was the speaker or someone maybe a year or two ago floated the idea of perhaps something like a pension scheme for members of parliament. That is an idea that I would...
But the Kenyans have all of that, the pensions bit, and they still have this. In fact, we also have quite a situation. If you look at the Kufuor era and when some of this changed, and in terms of implementation, yes, there were pension benefits as well to the tune of a sitting president and all of that. Yet we still have the 4 vehicles plus to be changed every 4 years and a house of the person's choice here and there. I mean, that is for the presidents and all of that. But there are also those that trickle down to ministers, members of parliament, and it's quite a huge chunk.
I agree. And
money.
Then we also perhaps can take a look at who truly should be classified as an Article 71 office holder. In fact, the most recent report, although of the Article 71 committee that is always set up to determine these things, the report had 10 principles based on which these emoluments should be determined. My only disappointment was that some of the outcomes from those 10 principles ended up being a little bit controversial. But those 10 principles, I think, is a really good starting point for having a really good conversation about how do we truly deal with Article 71 holders, because they point to things like, the state of the economy, the fiscal implications, parity in the, among public sector, those who render service in the public sector, things like that. So those 10 principles were very brilliant. And if we could have a national conversation around those 10 principles and translate them into, now, what do they actually mean? I think that would be one good way of addressing some of the concerns that Dr. Mantiao is raising.
So by and large, these are valid. Yes. We ought to pay attention to them as a people.
I believe so. I strongly believe so.
Dr. Akakpo, we're so grateful that you took the time to join us this morning. And once more, thank you so much. First time having you in the studio.
My pleasure.
After so long.
Yes. I will.
But do hold for me. Dr. Steve Mantiao, any quick reactions in some 30 seconds?
No, I have nothing to add or to kind of disagree in terms of the commentary run on my 17-point agenda. But let me say that the discussion overlooked also the management of our petroleum revenues with respect to the stabilization fund.
Right.
I do not think that as a country we've managed it very well. We amended the law in 2015 to even provide for the fact that the minister has the discretion to cap our stabilization fund, and then move the excess revenue into the sinking fund and the consolidated fund. Now, over the years, we never put anything into the consolidated fund. All the excess revenue were put into the sinking fund. Now, the sinking fund was set up purposely for servicing our debts. And therefore, when you cream off the excess over the stabilization fund cap into the sinking fund, then what you are invariably doing is feeding into our appetite to borrow. In fact, there were times when the stabilization fund was capped as low as 150 million. While I chaired PIAC, I made the argument that we needed to grow that fund to become very big so that when we go, money will support the economy. And indeed, when we went through the COVID challenge, that fund gave us $300 million to deal with the challenge. And this was because in that year, the cap had been lifted to 300 million. I think that we should remove the cap entirely so that the group fund as big as it can be to be able to support ourselves in times of crisis.
Dr. Manteo, grateful for your time. Dr. Steve Manteo, co-chair of the Ghana Extractive Industries Transparency Unit. And of course, he's been sharing his 17-point outline for us in terms of changing the script of Ghana. Now, right before we get into Kumasi and give you the citizens microphone and also talk about the EcoBank Joy News Habitat Fair. How's it? Hello. How about treating your family to a summer holiday in South Africa? Come journey to South Africa for a good time in our beautiful country. Get to know the locals, our languages, and if you're looking to let your hair down and relax, or you're just in the mood for some fun family-friendly adventures, South Africa has got everything you need. So this summer, Wazanila. Come this side and experience a holiday worth talking about. But hello Ghana, happy moment is here. We all know it's coming. Let's storm World Cup Qatar 2022 with Storm Energy Drink, Puma Soft Drinks and Awake Drinking Water from Casapreco Company Limited. All you have to do, buy your favorite Storm Energy Drink, Puma Soft Drinks and Awake Drinking Water, text the 4-digit unique code on the number of the bottle to short code *780#, choose option 2 and follow the prompts on all networks for free. You could be one of the lucky winners to this year's World Cup in the monthly draw. You can also win TVs, fridges, microwave ovens, mobile phones, home theaters, free drinks, and more instantly. So don't waste time. Grab a bottle of Storm Energy Drink, Puma Soft Drinks, and Awake Drinking Water, and let's storm Qatar this World Cup. This promotion is on the NLA Caritas platform. This advert is FDA approved. Terms and conditions do apply. And I'll tell you what, when we return, a lot more action on the AM shift. Do stay.